"You need to stop wasting time with these silly dreams and focus on reality," my mother Carol snapped, slamming my community college textbooks onto the kitchen counter. The sound echoed through our cramped house in Little Rock, Arkansas, making me flinch. I had just gotten home from my morning shift at Westland Manufacturing, where I operated machinery for 8 hours before rushing to my afternoon classes. My name is Elise Walker, and I'm 21 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been juggling a full-time job with part-time community college courses, desperately trying to build a future for myself. My parents Raymond and Carol had made it clear from the moment I graduated high school that I wasn't college material. They convinced me that pursuing higher education was a waste of time and money that our family simply didn't have. "Elise, honey, you're just not built for academic work," my father Raymond had said when I first mentioned wanting to attend university. "You're much better suited for practical work. There's nothing wrong with that." His words had stung, but I believed them. After all, they were my parents. They knew me better than anyone, right? So I took a job at the manufacturing plant, working double shifts whenever possible to save money. The work was exhausting, my hands constantly aching from operating the heavy machinery. But I told myself it was temporary. Secretly, I had enrolled in community college courses with my own money, attending classes in the evenings and weekends. My parents thought I was working extra shifts or hanging out with friends. "Why are you even bothering with this?" Carol continued, flipping through my biology textbook with obvious disdain. "You're already making decent money at the plant. Isn't that enough?" I felt my jaw tighten. "Mom, I want more than just getting by. I want to become a nurse, help people, maybe even go to medical school someday." Raymond looked up from his newspaper, shaking his head. "Medical school? Elise, be realistic. You barely made it through high school. College is for smart kids, and there's no shame in admitting that's not you." The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm doing well in my classes. I have a 3.8 grade point average." "That's community college," Carol scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything. Real universities are completely different. You just end up dropping out and wasting everyone's time and money." I grabbed my books and headed toward my room, but Raymond's voice stopped me. "We're just trying to protect you from disappointment, sweetheart. We've seen how the world works. People like us don't get fancy degrees. We work hard with our hands and make an honest living." As I closed my bedroom door, I wondered why my parents seemed so determined to crush my dreams. Something felt wrong about their constant discouragement, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Growing up, I had always been told that my family struggled financially. My parents worked at various jobs throughout my childhood, Raymond as a warehouse supervisor, and Carol as a receptionist at a dental office. They lived modestly, but not uncomfortably. We had a decent house, reliable cars, and never went without basic necessities. Yet whenever I mentioned college, they insisted we couldn't afford it. "Education is expensive, Elise," Carol would say whenever the topic came up. "We've got bills to pay and your father's retirement to think about. We can't just throw money away on pipe dreams." My grandfather, Arthur, my father's dad, had always been supportive of my academic interests. During family gatherings, he would ask about my grades and encourage me to keep studying. He was a retired engineer who had worked for Trevanta Corp for 35 years before retiring comfortably. Unlike my parents, he believed in the value of education. "Your grandmother and I always regretted not having more opportunities when we were young," he would tell me. "Education opens doors that nothing else can. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." But my parents always seemed uncomfortable when Grandfather Arthur talked about education. They would quickly change the subject or make excuses about why college wasn't practical for our family. I noticed how they would exchange meaningful looks whenever he brought up my future prospects. My relationship with my cousin Marcus, Uncle Dennis's son, had become strained over the years. Marcus was the same age as me and had gone straight to university after high school. During family gatherings, he would talk about his classes, his internships, and his bright future. My parents would smile and congratulate him, then turned to me with pity in their eyes. "See how different people have different paths?" Raymond would say quietly. "Marcus is the academic type. You're more practical." What hurt most was hearing how my parents talked about me to other family members. I had overheard Carol talking to my Aunt Patricia at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. "Elise just isn't motivated for school," Carol had whispered. "She's content working at the plant. Some people are just happier with simpler lives." The conversation had made me feel ashamed and angry. They were painting me as lazy and unambitious when I was working harder than anyone I knew. I was exhausted from juggling work and school, sacrificing sleep and social activities to pursue my education in secret. My savings account was pathetically small, despite working constantly. Between rent money I gave my parents, car expenses, and tuition payments, I barely had anything left. I lived on cheap ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, wearing the same worn-out clothes for years. Every textbook was bought used. Every fee payment was a struggle. Still, I persisted. Something inside me refused to accept that this was all I was capable of achieving. Deep down, I knew my parents were wrong about me, even if I couldn't understand why they seemed so invested in keeping me down. The breaking point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon in November. I was studying for my anatomy exam at the kitchen table when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the window, I saw Grandfather Arthur's familiar blue sedan. He visited occasionally, usually unannounced, bringing his warm smile and genuine interest in my life. "Grandfather?" I called out, genuinely happy to see him. He was one of the few people who made me feel like my dreams were valid. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, giving me a warm hug. "How are your studies going?" Before I could answer, my parents appeared from the living room. I noticed the tension immediately, the way my father's shoulders stiffened, and how my mother's smile looked forced. "Dad, what brings you by?" Raymond asked, his voice carefully neutral. Grandfather Arthur looked at me with pride. "I was just thinking about Elise, and wondering how she's enjoying the college fund I set up for her. Are you getting good use out of it, honey?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him blankly, my anatomy textbook forgotten. "What college fund?" The silence in the room was deafening. My parents had gone completely pale, and I could see panic in their eyes. Grandfather Arthur looked confused, glancing between me and my parents. "The education fund I established 3 years ago," he said slowly, "for your university expenses. I deposited $15,000 specifically for your college costs." My world tilted on its axis. $15,000. While I had been working myself to exhaustion, pinching every penny, eating cheap food and wearing secondhand clothes to afford community college, there had been money sitting somewhere that was meant for my education. "I don't know anything about any college fund," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Grandfather Arthur's expression shifted from confusion to something much darker. He turned to face my parents, his voice taking on a steel edge I had never heard before. "Raymond, Carol, where is the money I entrusted to you for Elise's education?" "Dad, we can explain," Raymond started, but his voice was shaking. "I've been working double shifts to pay for community college," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been eating ramen noodles for dinner and buying used textbooks because I thought we couldn't afford my education. You told me I wasn't college material, that we didn't have money for school." Carol opened her mouth to speak, but Grandfather Arthur held up his hand. "We need to have a serious conversation about this. All of us. Right now." I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The shame and self-doubt I had carried for years began transforming into something else entirely. Anger, betrayal, and a growing determination to understand exactly how deep this deception went. "Don't worry, Grandfather," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'll handle this." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my family. Grandfather Arthur demanded to see documentation of the fund he had established, while my parents stumbled through increasingly desperate excuses. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands clenched into fists, watching my entire understanding of my life crumble. "The money is safe," Raymond insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We just thought it would be better to invest it until Elise was ready for a real university. Community college isn't what you intended the fund for." "Community college is exactly what the fund was for," Grandfather Arthur snapped. "Any educational expense Elise incurred. That was explicitly stated when I set this up." I found my voice, though it sounded strange and foreign to my own ears. "How much money are we talking about?" Grandfather Arthur turned to me, his expression gentle, despite his obvious anger at my parents. 15,000 initially, plus interest over 3 years. It should be close to $18,000 by now. $18,000. The number hit me like a truck. I calculated quickly in my head. That was more than I had made in my entire part-time work history. It was enough to pay for my remaining community college courses and transfer to a 4-year university with money left over. "I want to see the account statements," I said firmly. "Right now." My parents exchanged another one of their meaningful looks, and I realized I had been seeing these silent communications my entire life without understanding their significance. They were always plotting, always coordinating their story. "Elise, honey, you're getting upset over nothing," Carol said, reaching out to touch my arm. I pulled away sharply. "Don't touch me, and don't call me honey. Show me the account statements for my college fund. Now." "The money is tied up in investments," Raymond said quickly. "It's not easily accessible right now. The stock market, you know how it is." Grandfather Arthur's face was turning red. "I specifically instructed you to put that money in an education savings account, not to invest it in the stock market. Where is my money, Raymond?" The word "my" hung in the air like an accusation. It wasn't even technically my money. It was Grandfather Arthur's money that he had entrusted to my parents for my benefit, which made their betrayal even more profound. "We needed to make some financial adjustments," Carol admitted quietly. "The roof repairs last year. Raymond's car troubles. We borrowed against it temporarily." "Borrowed against it?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "You spent my college money on car repairs." "We plan to pay it back," Raymond said defensively. "And like we said, we didn't think you were serious about college anyway. You never mentioned wanting to go to university." "Because you convinced me I was too stupid." The words exploded out of me. "You spent 3 years telling me I wasn't smart enough, that college was a waste of time for someone like me. You made me believe I was worthless." Grandfather Arthur was staring at my parents with an expression of complete disgust. "You sabotaged your own daughter's future. You took money specifically designated for her education and spent it on yourselves while convincing her she wasn't worthy of that education." The full scope of their manipulation was becoming clear. They hadn't just hidden the money. They had actively worked to undermine my confidence and ambition so I wouldn't ask questions about college funding. They had shaped my entire self-perception to cover up their theft. "I'm going to need detailed financial records," Grandfather Arthur continued. "Bank statements, investment accounts, receipts for where this money went. And I'm going to need them today." "Dad, please," Raymond pleaded. "We can work this out as a family." "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call lying to someone for 3 years while they work themselves to exhaustion? Is that what you call stealing someone's future?" I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't protective or concerned about my well-being. They were selfish, manipulative people who had been willing to sacrifice my future for their own convenience. Over the following weeks, the investigation into my college fund revealed layers of deception that went far deeper than I had imagined. Grandfather Arthur brought in his attorney, and what we discovered made my stomach turn. Not only had my parents spent the original $15,000, but they had taken out loans against the projected value of the fund, accumulating additional debt in my name. "They forged your signature on loan documents," the attorney explained during a meeting at his office. Technically, you're responsible for nearly $8,000 in debt that you never authorized. I stared at the papers spread across the conference table, feeling like I was living in a nightmare. They can do that? Not legally, no. This constitutes identity theft and fraud. We have grounds for criminal charges if you choose to pursue them. Grandfather Arthur placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Whatever you decide, I'll support you completely. But first, let's focus on getting your education back on track. The betrayal cut deeper when I learned how my parents had been portraying me to extended family members. Grandfather Arthur had reached out to other relatives to understand how widespread the deception was, and the results were devastating. Your cousin Marcus told me that your parents claimed you had dropped out of high school and were working because you couldn't handle academic work. Grandfather Arthur reported grimly. They've been telling people you're lazy and unmotivated, that you refused offers of educational help. I felt physically sick. While I had been working exhausting shifts and maintaining a high-grade point average in secret, my parents had been destroying my reputation with our entire extended family. They had painted me as a failure and a disappointment to cover up their own theft and manipulation. The most painful revelation came when I discovered that other family members had offered to help with my education over the years, but my parents had declined on my behalf without telling me. Uncle Dennis asked about contributing to your college expenses 2 years ago. Grandfather Arthur continued. Your parents told him you weren't interested in education and preferred working with your hands. Every conversation, every family gathering, every interaction suddenly made sense in this new context. The pitying looks, the awkward silences when my future was discussed, the way relatives seemed to avoid asking me about my plans. They all believed I was exactly what my parents had told them I was. But the anger that had been building inside me was transforming into something more powerful: determination. I was going to expose everything at Christmas Eve dinner, when the entire family would be gathered together. They were all going to learn the truth about what Raymond and Carol had done, and about who I really was. I spent the weeks leading up to Christmas gathering documentation, bank statements showing the missing fund money, my community college transcripts proving my academic success, work records demonstrating my employment history and the exhausting schedule I had maintained, letters from professors praising my performance and potential. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? Grandfather Arthur asked when I explained my plan. It's going to cause a significant family disruption. Good, I said firmly. They disrupted my entire life. They stole my money, my confidence, and my reputation. They made me believe I was worthless while they were spending money meant for my future. The whole family needs to know exactly what kind of people they are. I also made another decision that would ensure my parents faced real consequences for their actions. I was going to file a formal complaint with the police for identity theft and fraud. They needed to understand that their actions had legal repercussions, not just family drama. Christmas Eve couldn't come soon enough. Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonably warm weather for Arkansas, but the atmosphere inside our house was Arctic. My parents had been treating me with nervous politeness since Grandfather Arthur's investigation began, clearly hoping to minimize the damage before the family gathering. They had no idea what was coming. The family dinner was being held at our house, as it had been for the past 5 years. By 6 p.m., everyone had arrived. Grandfather Arthur, Uncle Dennis, and Aunt Patricia with their son Marcus, Aunt Beverly with her husband William, and my younger cousins Jessica and Tyler. The living room buzzed with familiar holiday conversations about work, weather, and weekend plans. I had prepared carefully for this moment. In my bedroom, I had organized all the documentation into a clear presentation. Bank statements showing the missing college fund, my community college transcripts, work schedules proving the exhausting hours I had been working, letters from professors, and most importantly, copies of the forged loan documents that my parents had created in my name. Elise has been so quiet today, Aunt Patricia observed during dinner. Are you feeling all right, honey? I looked around the table at my family members. most of whom believed I was an unmotivated high school dropout who preferred manual labor to education. They had no idea that I had been secretly pursuing my dreams while my parents actively sabotaged me. "Actually, I have something important to share with everyone," I said, standing up from my chair. The conversation gradually died down as all eyes turned to me. My parents went rigid. Raymond's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and Carol's face drained of all color. They knew something was coming, but they had no idea how devastating it would be. "I've recently learned some information that I think the whole family should know," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Information about my education and my future that some people in this room have been hiding." Grandfather Arthur nodded encouragingly from across the table. He had been waiting for this moment almost as eagerly as I had. 3 weeks ago, Grandfather Arthur asked me how I was enjoying the college fund he had set up for me. I paused, letting the words sink in. I had to tell him I didn't know anything about any college fund. Uncle Dennis looked confused. "What college fund?" "The $15,000 that Grandfather Arthur entrusted to my parents 3 years ago, specifically for my educational expenses," I said clearly. "Money that I never saw, never knew about, and never benefited from." The silence was immediate and complete. Marcus was staring at me with his mouth open. Aunt Beverly had put down her wine glass and was looking back and forth between me and my parents. "While this money was sitting in an account somewhere, I've been working double shifts at Westland Manufacturing to pay for community college classes," I continued. "I've been attending school part-time for 3 years, maintaining a 3.8 grade point average, while working full-time to pay tuition." "Wait," Marcus said slowly. "You're in college?" "I've been in college for 3 years," I confirmed. Something our parents told everyone I was too lazy and stupid to handle. I went to my room and returned with the folder of documentation, spreading the papers across the dining room table where everyone could see them. Transcripts, work schedules, tuition receipts, professor recommendations. The explosion of voices was immediate. Uncle Dennis was demanding explanations from my parents. Aunt Patricia was examining my transcripts with amazement. Marcus was apologizing for believing I was unmotivated. And Grandfather Arthur was watching with grim satisfaction as the truth finally came to light. But I wasn't finished yet. I had saved the worst revelation for last. "There's more," I announced, raising my voice above the family chaos. The room fell silent again, everyone turning back to me with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I pulled out the final set of documents, the loan papers with my forged signature. Not only did my parents spend the $15,000 that Grandfather Arthur entrusted to them, but they also took out additional loans in my name. $8,000 in debt that I never authorized and never knew about. Uncle Dennis grabbed the papers, his face darkening as he examined them. "These are loan documents with Elise's signature." "Forged signature," I corrected. "I never signed those papers. I never applied for those loans. But according to the credit agencies, I'm responsible for paying them back." The room erupted again, but this time the anger was directed entirely at my parents. Aunt Beverly was on her feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Raymond and Carol. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. Grandfather Arthur's face had gone completely red. "You committed identity theft against your own daughter," Uncle Dennis said, his voice full of disgust, "while she was working herself to exhaustion to pay for school." Carol finally found her voice. "We were going to pay it back. We never meant for it to go this far." "You meant exactly for it to go this far," I shot back. "You spent 3 years convincing me I was too stupid for college so I wouldn't ask questions about funding. You told the whole family I was lazy and unmotivated to cover up what you had done. You systematically destroyed my confidence and my reputation to hide your theft." Raymond tried to speak, but Grandfather Arthur cut him off with a gesture that commanded immediate silence. "I trusted you with that money because I believed you wanted the best for your daughter," Grandfather Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet. "Instead, you stole from her and then convinced her she was worthless to cover up your crime. I looked around the table at my family members, really looked at them, and saw something I had never seen before. Respect. They were looking at me with respect and admiration, not pity or disappointment. The police report has already been filed, I announced calmly. Identity theft and fraud charges will be processed next week. The aftermath was swift and devastating for my parents. As the family dinner dissolved into heated arguments and demands for explanations, Raymond and Carol found themselves completely isolated. Every family member who had previously believed their lies about me now understood the full scope of their deception and manipulation. Uncle Dennis was the first to act. "Patricia and I want to contribute to Elise's education fund," he announced. "We should have questioned their story about you not being interested in college. We're sorry we believed them." Marcus looked stricken with guilt. "I feel terrible for thinking you were unmotivated. They told us you had dropped out of high school and refused help. I should have talked to you directly." Aunt Beverly nodded firmly. "William and I will help too. What they did is unforgivable." One by one, my extended family members pledged financial support for my education. But more importantly, they pledged emotional support. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a family that believed in me and my potential. My parents sat in stunned silence as their carefully constructed web of lies crumbled around them. The family members who had once respected them now looked at them with disgust and disappointment. Their reputation was destroyed, their relationships severed, and their actions exposed for the selfish, manipulative behavior it had always been. "We'll pay back every penny," Raymond said desperately. "We'll make this right." Grandfather Arthur stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite his obvious anger. "You'll pay back every penny because the law will force you to, but you'll never make this right. You stole 3 years of your daughter's confidence and self-worth. You convinced her she was worthless while profiting from her potential. That's something no amount of money can repair. The Christmas Eve dinner that was supposed to bring our family together had instead exposed the truth that would tear it apart forever. And I had never felt more powerful or vindicated in my entire life." In the months that followed, Raymond and Carol faced the full weight of their actions. The identity theft and fraud charges resulted in criminal convictions, substantial fines, and mandatory restitution payments. Their reputations within our extended family and community were permanently destroyed, and several relatives cut contact with them entirely. They were forced to sell their house to pay legal fees and repay the stolen education fund, moving to a small apartment across town where they lived with the shame of their exposed deception. The stress of the legal proceedings and family ostracism took a visible toll on both of them, aging them years in a matter of months. 2 years later, I transferred to the University of Arkansas with a full scholarship and family support I had never dreamed possible. I'm now pursuing a pre-med degree with the confidence that comes from knowing exactly who I am and what I'm capable of achieving. Sometimes I think about that Christmas Eve dinner and how perfectly everything unfolded. Not because I had planned every detail, but because the truth has a way of demanding to be heard. My revenge wasn't just about exposing their lies. It was about reclaiming the person I had always been underneath their manipulation, and that victory feels sweeter than any amount of money could ever provide.